just to save us. The earth was shaken in the dark. All creation felt the Father's broken heart. Tears were filling heaven's eyes. The day that true love died, the day that true love died, when blood and water hit the ground. Walls we couldn't move came crashing down, and we were free and made alive. The day that true love died, the day that true love died. Yeah. Search your hearts, you know you can't deny. Come on, lose yourself just so you can find it. The Father gave His only Son just to save us. The earth was shaken in the dark. All creation felt the Father's broken heart. Tears were filling heaven's eyes. The day that true love died, the day that true love died, when blood and water hit the ground. Walls we couldn't move came crashing down, and we were free and made alive. The day that true love died, the day that true love died.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Y'all ready to get started? Good morning, good morning. Come on in, everybody, and find a seat. Hey, Miss Susan. All right, we've got plenty of seats, guys. It shouldn't be hard to find one. All right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, come on in. I know everybody wants to visit, and that's a wonderful thing. That's one of the great things about church, is getting to see all your friends and catching up with everybody. All right. Good morning. All right. They'd rather visit than hear what you have to say. Steve, do you think that's true? I don't. Okay. I am so glad that y'all are here today. This is our 5th and final combined summer soul food, where Steve has been doing a fabulous job, giving us so many great things to think about as we study the Psalms. The sermons will continue through August. The preachers will still continue to preach on a few more Psalms, but this is our last time during the Sunday school hour to discuss the Psalms together. But I hope when you go back to your Sunday school classes, maybe y'all will still continue to talk about the Psalms or whatever topic that you'd like to. But I do want to really, really thank Steve for all that he's done to help us and all the insight that he's given us. It's been great. We really appreciate it. And I also want to thank Jeff Rhodes, who is in the back. Thank you, Jeff. He's a technical genius. And James Grubb helped so much as well when we were in the sanctuary. So it takes a lot of hands to make all this happen. So we're very grateful to those guys. That being said, I think I'll open us up in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for the opportunity to come and worship you and to study your word and to learn more about you and how awesome you are and all that you do for us. We come today also to give you thanks and praise, and we thank you for your son, Jesus, and we offer this prayer in his name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruthie. What was it that Jesus said about the goats on the left and the sheep on the right? Or was it? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's this way. Yeah. I never quite understood that. No, well, see, it can go either way, depending on whether you look at this way or that way. Pam, it's good to see you. Good to see you back. Thank you for coming. I will be handing out purple hearts at the end of our session for your endurance in this series. I told Ruthie that I didn't know where I was going when it started. I had a book. I'm not really good on books. Perhaps the best that I have ever experienced with using a book was when Barbara Adams gave us one for the Lenten series in the Mind of Christ. And it was really one of the best that I experienced. But anyway, we try to look at the Psalms as not just as praise and prayer, as we've talked about before, and there's certainly a lot of good information in the Psalms about that. And this morning's sermon was an excellent example of it. But I wanted to look at more of the pathways that we receive by reading the Psalms perhaps in a different way. And so that's where I fumble through on all of this. So today we're going to wind up on the final path. It might lead us somewhere, and it might not, but we'll get at it. I do believe that one of the real advantages of deliberate reading of the Psalms is that every time you read a psalm, you can get another point of view. If you can really get into it. And that's what we wanted to try to do. And the first one, what we've looked at so far was that the Psalm suggests an openness, that we really can't do the Psalms unless we are honest about the Psalms. And so we talked about honesty. Honesty with ourselves, honesty with the community that is a part of our community, and honesty with God. So it does require a sense of openness when we read the Psalms. And we can hardly confront evil that impacts our lives in direct and indirect ways unless we're honest about our own spiritual frailty. And let's be honest, there is a frailty that we experience in our lives. Every time things change for us, we sometimes kind of run from that spirituality that we have developed. So the Psalms gives us a sense that others have had that problem with that. And as we look at the Psalms, we get a sense of the justice that God brings to us through that. So our definition of justice is more exclusionary than restorative. This is what I've really found out about myself in this study, is that I tend to look at justice as excluding certain solutions rather than restorative kind of approach to it. So the Psalms gives us some guidance as a result of that, and it makes it difficult for us to recognize when we have that approach to it, that exclusionary approach. It makes it difficult for us to see the injustice that actually surrounds us. And then any hope for redeeming mercy, and this is what we want to talk about today, is mercy. It begins with an honest assessment of our actions, however small they are, towards our neighbors. So that's where it really begins. This is where we have an opportunity to practice what the Psalms teach, is that in our relationship with our neighbors. So we've looked at honesty, we've looked at the presence of evil, we've talked about justice last week. Today we want to look a little bit about the mercy that's in there. I want to talk first about that alignment that we need to have and how the Psalms points towards mercy. We'll speak to authority. Mercy requires an authority. Somebody's got to give it. And so we want to speak to where is the authority and how do we approach the authority in here. So we look at how the Psalms will point us towards that. How we define mercy, our definition of it. What does mercy mean to us? And think about it in your own context of things in your daily lives. Mercy. It informs our attitude and how we respond to authority. When that blue light goes off behind you and you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, you begin to formulate, you may not know it, but we begin to formulate this whole connection between authority and mercy. We know that he or she has the authority, they got the badge and they got the blue light. But is there a possibility of mercy in there somewhere? We know our insurance rates are going up. We know that our wallets are going to be a little less full as a result of that. So it's how we define that sense of mercy sometimes and that relationship to authority that's a really important one. And how we select to use authority defines our sense of justice. So come back on our side here. Every day, we are in control of something. And how we use the authority that we have will define then what our sense of justice might be. Those of us who've reared children have had plenty of opportunity to experience that because we are the authority figure. And so justice comes out of our use of that power as an authority. And how the future authority of organized religion, let's think specifically about the Christian church, will depend on evangelism. Now, evangelism is not one of those, it's not one of those words that I feel warm and fuzzy about a lot of time. As a matter of fact, it's a word that I run from a lot of the time. This whole idea of evangelism conjures up in my feeble mind some of the things that Smoke talked about this morning. He opened his sermon this morning talking about a couple who represented authority, represented evangelism and all that sort of thing, and how tragically they fell. So that's all I'm going to tell you about it. If you haven't been, go to the 11 o'clock service. It's a good service. But really, it's the church itself. How well has the church done it? And how well has the church done in defining evangelism? And so I think that we may be talking about a radical form of evangelism and our greatest hope for a merciful and just world. Because we know in our community, we don't have to go very far outside of these doors to know that there's a world that is hurting. And there's a world that is oppressed. And there's a lot of things that are unjust about the life that we live in. So radical evangelism maybe something that we need to embrace as a Christian church. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So, speaking of mercy, there are a few quotes for you here. I've always found that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice. That's Abraham Lincoln. He always is able to come up with a good quote in there. So, that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice. Perhaps our children may have thought that would have been good for them to have had as a quote back then. So sometimes we might have been right strict. So, teach me to feel another's woe, to hide the faults I see, that the mercy I show to others, that mercy will be shown to me. And that's Alexander Pope. Probably some of you studied Alexander. It's a poem. Things rhyme. But what he's saying is, I want to walk in their moccasins. That way, maybe I'll know what mercy is really about by having experience from that. And then lastly, from a theologian going back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, nowhere do we imitate God more than showing mercy. That's a really good one. Nowhere do we imitate God more than by showing mercy. So, mercy in the Psalms. There are 36 uses of the word mercy in the Psalms. Last week I told you about 18 times justice is used, 36 times mercy is used, and the implications are even more than that in there. But the word mercy or merciful is used 36 times. I'm going to take you through all 36, but I'm not going to talk about all 36. We never would get out of here. But what you can get a sense of by just kind of glancing at some of the key words in here, that here, mostly David, mostly what I have up here is David. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy, right? Have mercy on me when you hear my prayer. Then in bold, these are the ones I want to look at a little bit more. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. This is the time David is a little bit older there, but he's asking for mercy as he ages in there. And then another one, Lord, see my enemies, persecute me. See how the enemies persecute me. Have mercy and lift me up from the gates of death. Here he's shifting just from his own personal hurts to those that are caused by others outside of him. Again, he's asking when he gets old, show a lot of mercy with him on that. Another from David, I lead a blameless life. I don't know where that came from. David saying, I lead a blameless life. Deliver me and be merciful to me. But I think that must have happened. Answer me, Lord, out of the goodness of your love and your great mercy. Turn to me. Has God forgotten to be merciful? Something about the sermon this morning. Do the oppressed sometimes do better than those who are righteous? So David is asking, have you forgotten how to be merciful? We can experience it. There are days in our lives when we see what's happening, like in Kentucky right now. Where is God in that? And so we're asking for mercy, as David was asking for mercy. Yet he was merciful. He gave their iniquities and did not destroy them. Time after time, he restrained his anger and did not stir up his full wrath. That doesn't seem to be the one that's up there. All right. Maybe I skipped over that, but I'll sometimes this clicker takes control of me, and I ask for mercy from it here. So hear my voice. I recall the Lord. Okay, I'll see where I am now. Praise to the Lord, for he has heard my cry. He is saying, again, thanks, I have heard it. You have been there. In my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. Yet you heard my cry for mercy, and I call to you for help. So this is, again, David recognizing that while he was cut off for a while, the merciful God had responded to his cry for help. And again, pleading that his mercy not be withheld. Have mercy on me, the one in the bold in the middle. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. This is one that we have seen and heard many times before in the past. It's one of the more popular ones there. So answer me, Lord, in the goodness of your love, and show great mercy when I turn to you. Have you forgotten to be merciful? Have you withheld your hand? Yet he was. He forgave their iniquities. He did not destroy them. Time after time, he restrained his anger. He did not stir up his full wrath. That's where I thought I was a while ago. This is the one where we have shifted over from being the first person to now thinking of it as a group, the community. Yet he forgave their iniquities. This is Asaph writing in here, not David. So you can see that the theme there, it is largely that cry for mercy from a merciful God. Now, David was a complicated person. We know that. As a young man, he was called into action. He did not demonstrate a great deal of mercy towards Goliath, but maybe that was at the time where God's wrath needed to be expressed. But as a young man before Saul, trying to soothe Saul's mental health problems, and he really did have mental health problems as a king, perhaps it was the stress of what he was doing, he brought to him peaceful songs. And then we see him with Nathan counseling him, saying, you really have transgressed. And then we see him prostrate because of the death of Absalom, all as a result of his evil past in there. So we know that mercy is something that is reflected throughout the psalm. So end up on the 36 of them that are there, that Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my cry for mercy. In your faithfulness and righteousness, come to my relief. So that's the promise that we have through the psalm. So I think it's probably important that we look at what mercy definition might be. It's a compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to actually punish or harm. That's what mercy is. I mean, you've got the authority. We're going to come back to authority. You got the authority to punish, to harm, to forgive, all of that. So that's what mercy is a recognition of compassion, using compassion or forgiveness. And these are some of the synonyms that go with it. And you can see there are quite a few that go with this idea of mercy. Forgiveness, and I started to look at that relationship and difference between forgiveness and mercy. And if you think on it, is it the same thing? When you can forgive, but showing mercy is a different thing. I'll give you an example. This past week, the Pope spent the week in Canada with Indigenous people asking for forgiveness for the 200 plus Indigenous children that somehow disappeared during their attendance of Catholic school. pretty strong statement for the Catholic Church to make, that we killed your children. They were indigenous children. They were First Nation children. And we buried them in unmarked graves. I mean, that sounds unbelievable to us. The Catholic Church, and by the way, some of those schools started out as Methodist schools. And ultimately, the Catholic Church took over those schools. Here is the Pope saying, please forgive us. Please forgive our organization of church. Now, where is mercy? What would mercy be? The leaders of those indigenous nations, the many different tribes that are represented in Canada, has many, many of them. I have the wonderful opportunity to work with a number of them, and still do. You look at them sometimes and you say, there has been no mercy. Because the alcoholism, the drug abuse, the poverty, the mental health problems are just overwhelming. We've had some of those same problems. Don't know yet that we've had exactly the situation that's happening there in Ontario. But what I'm getting at is that, is forgiveness, is that enough? The Catholic Church must be out of money for all the money that they've paid out, and I don't mean to be banging on the Catholic Church. I really am quite fond of the Catholic Church. But where is the mercy in that? How do you find mercy in that? And it's not just the Catholic Church. It is the institution of church sometimes that needs to be asking for the forgiveness. And what would be the appropriate form of justice and mercy? You can see, I don't know if you can see right here, it's kind of washed out, the works of mercy. These have been around for a long, long time. 7 on the corporal side, kind of daily living, 7 on the spiritual side in there. But it does give us some clue. And down here, the comfort the afflicted, forgive offenses, all of those things are part of what the spiritual life says that we should be doing as it relates to mercy and forgiveness. So there is a term, Al, I don't know if it's a legal term or not, it's a term that's used in architecture a lot, the authority having jurisdiction. It happens in law enforcement investigations. Who's the authority who has jurisdiction? So that we can sort out who's responsible, who can make the decision, who has the authority, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a popular term. So what I want to look at is, in the definition of it, it's the power of the person or organization to give orders and make decisions and enforce obedience. So that's the authority having jurisdiction. Go think about it in the context of the church here in a minute. So we look at some examples of it, present-day examples of it. You know who this guy is. I have not been timid in saying that he is a person that I am not sure deserves to walk the face of the earth. However, that is not my job to decide. But that is Mr. Putin sitting here at one end of the table. This is our Congress. These are people who have authority to make and they are the authority having jurisdiction. They make the laws. This next crowd of the Supremes, they get to interpret them. Hopefully with a sense of justice, a sense of mercy, et cetera, it happens. The next is the lone blogger. Who would have thought 15 years ago that that person would have all of the authority to influence the minds and directions of so many other people? The blogger, the social media. You don't have to be in Congress. You don't have to be on the Supreme Court. That's where the influence is. The people who have authority is quite different from the people who we used to think of as having authority. What about the corporations? What about the corporate? They have authority. They tell us what to eat. I mean, McDonald's has decided what nutritional value we should be seeking every day. And they impose that on us whether we like it or not. You know, eat the French fries. You can't stop eating the French fries. And why can't you stop eating the French fries? It's because of what's in the French fries. We can get addicted to the sugar, the salt, all of those kind of things. These are people who have authority. Corporations have authority. Look at Exxon, look at BP, look at all of those in there. The schools, we know the schools have quite a bit of authority. And sometimes as parents, we shift the authority that we have to the schools and say, that's where you're going to get it. So these are all people in our daily lives right now that have authority. So we're asking ourselves then, are they merciful? Are they just? And all of this. So lastly, here the young woman saying we need a change. I think we do. That's just radical evangelism in here. What we don't transform, we will transmit. So what we don't change, what we don't transform, we will. So you remember, I think it was in the first, if not the second, of the series, I talked about the survey that Gallup had recently done that said less than a third of Americans right now think that the church is an honest organization. It's just devastating. But the church has a lot of authority. Just talked about the church in Canada in there. Is it crumbling? Has church really changed? And what is it that we can do to look at that? So, I want to look at how are Christians doing with mercy? So, how are we doing? A few quotes for you here. The standing structural proof that Christianity was intended to be an inclusive religion is that 2/3 of the Christian Bible is a Jewish Bible. I told you earlier, the Psalms are written by Jews for Jews. Our Bible that we hold so dearly is really the Jewish Bible, if you want to look at who the authors were. So that means we are inclusive. It's not a religion that's separate from ours. We are universal in a lot of our thoughts in here. And we have to look at then how does mercy work in a more inclusive type religion. And our entire Bible is filled with stories, metaphors, images, and even names for God that were taken from pre-Jewish religions, pagan sources, secular history, and Greek philosophy. It's true. There are a lot of the Christian tenets, if you will, that are reflected in the sayings of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus really came through the thinking of Buddhism. That would happen before us. That happened before Jesus. All of that came because the merchants came west to trade, and they brought their philosophy with them. Just like out of the Greeks, as they fell to death, they brought their religion. We are an inclusive religion, but sometimes we want to build a silo and say, no, we got it right here. So let's just do it our way here. The Christians know best. Naive Christians still want to make their recent version of Christianity totally exclusionary and elitist in relationship to all other revelations of God. Said naive Christians, these are not my words. Naive Christians, we want our version of Christianity to be the only thing out there. And I think that's one of the reasons why only 32% of those surveyed said, I really don't trust the church, the organized religion. Because look at what, it's their way or the highway. Where am I in this? I'm kind of in between. I'm still struggling. Where is the place for me? That's the challenge, I think, that we have. And it's there for us in the Psalms as a pathway. When we are true to our Jewish sources now, Jesus himself is easily seen as an inclusive Son of God, inviting us to join him and not the exclusive Son of God into what we have made him. saying, this is really, Jesus is ours. And unless you come over to our side, you don't have access to him. Is that merciful? And is it true? I don't know the answer to that. I know what the billboard says coming into South Carolina. Jesus, the only way to heaven, right there. I asked a couple of political figures, was that good public relations, and was it actual, or was it good theology? I didn't get invited back to that little group, but it is. I experience this in my life a lot because I do a lot of work in the Muslim world and in the Jewish world. And I would never say to him, Jesus is mine. Other side of it. Jesus never said that. Susan and I attended a virtual Atlantic Institute meeting this week. I've mentioned the Atlantic Institute to you before. It's a wonderful organization. It's an interfaith organization. It's in South Carolina. Sometimes we have people from outside of South Carolina. This past week was on Islam. And we had a young man, quite a young man, who was born in the United States, is an American citizen, studied in the United States, went to university here, went over to Pakistan to see what his native land might be like, stayed there for a few years, came back and teaches in one of the universities here in our state right now. And he invited questions during the course of the discussion. And I did my little chat room bit, and I said, does God have a gender? And I didn't know. I didn't know. You know, we think sometimes about Islam being quite strict, very specific laws, very specific justice. Talk a lot about mercy having to do with their laws. Sharia law is one of them. And he came back and said, God doesn't have a gender, which really reflects our belief. We don't believe God has a gender. And he then went on to say how important Jesus was. To me, that's inclusiveness. That's inclusiveness coming from a religion that we sometimes say, these are the people that we really don't want to spend a lot of time with. I think if we do it on an individual basis, we will find a lot more inclusiveness, and that is what Jesus was talking about. And that's what the Psalms were pointing to, was the inclusiveness that we have to do there. So it seems we found it much easier to worship him and to imitate him. And this is back to Barbara Adams. I think that book that she required that we read, and she is a tough taskmaster on this, required that we read and share in our class in the mind of Christ, trying to put ourselves in the mind of Christ was one of the most important things that I experienced in Lent last year. And that's what we find it easier to just worship, just come to church, than to imitate. And that's what we're called on to do. If we want radical evangelism out there, then that's what we're called upon to do, is to do a lot more than imitate. All of this came from the Center for Action and Contemplation. And Father Richard Rohr is really one of my heroes in this field in terms of contemplative thinking about the church and where the church is going. And he's Catholic. And he is inviting us to really be far more thoughtful, far more merciful in our thinking about the church and the universal church in there. So how do we discover it? We discover it, I think, through listening. And that's what I want to look at here in our final moments here. Jesus says people who live the vulnerable life of connection and relationship will bear much fruit. These are the people we trust, like, and admire. And yet so many of us are afraid to be the very thing that we admire most. Last week we talked about that one of the second or third requirements in searching justice in the Psalms was to have leaders that we could look to, mentors, if you will, in that. And what we're told is that Jesus really did live the life of a vulnerable life. We have to make ourselves vulnerable. We can't be right all the time. And sometimes in organized religion, what is more important is to be right than to be just or to be merciful in there. Listening does not grant the other side legitimacy. It grants them humanity and preserves our own humanity. I think that is so true. When we listen to a person and we're called upon here, we discover how to become merciful through listening. It's what David was saying in a number of the songs in there. So we become merciful by listening. But listening does not say we can think everything you say is correct, but we think that you are human. And it is our responsibility to listen with mercy and in a merciful kind of way. And to listen closely with every fiber of our being at every moment of the day is one of the most difficult things in the world. And yet it is essential if we mean to find God whom we are seeking. Susan gave me a T-shirt for Father's Day. Still hurts. It says that 90% of marriage is yelling what from the other room. 90% of marriage is yelling what from the other room. And after she gave that, and I dutifully wear it, sometimes I actually sleep in it, hoping that it will, actually somehow work. I found out it is absolutely true. I mean, we live in a small place now, and so we don't have that far to go. But it's amazing, amazing how much communication happens around clothes, and you all know that. But it also happens in our spiritual life if we have to listen very closely. And it's one of the primary things that counselors will tell you when you're seeking advice in some of these kind of areas, is you got to learn to listen better. And to be merciful, is directly related to how good we are at listening. So these are some things I think that to become merciful, we got to practice that. So I told you I would try to wind up here with providing some hope. And I think hope comes best by looking at the Psalms and what the Psalm says. Now, I certainly didn't try to identify all the times that hope is mentioned in the Psalms. But there are some verses that I thought really, really did help direct us in that. But God will never forget the needy. The hope of the afflicted will never perish. Again, part of the sermon this morning is just about that. Do those who live lives that are not just and merciful lives, do they ever get their comeuppance? Is there hope that those who have been oppressed will actually find comfort in their lives? We all pray that one. There's enough going on in the world right now for that. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. You got to practice that one. You got to find a way, I think, to be hopeful, even in times when it appears there is none. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. This is kind of in Psalm 39, almost a point of exasperation here. I've run out of options here. What else can I hope for? Is in it. For what you have done, I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people. and I will hope in your name, for your name is good. The 52nd Psalm is one of the famous Psalms in there. I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people. Surrounding ourselves with community where there is hopefulness is one of our challenges. But it is also one of the main messages in the Psalms. Psalms, as I said in the very first lesson, is really not about individual, even though so much of it is David speaking. It's about community. It's about the community of David speaking, appealing to God, appealing for that hope. Lord, the Lord mighty, may those who hope in you not be disgraced because of me. God of Israel, may those who seek you not be put to shame because of me. I told you last week that one of the books that I've been listening to on tape is a story about the Japanese American soldiers who fought for us in World War II, even as their parents were incarcerated. Talk about justice, talk about mercy, but we won't go there in this discussion. But what their fathers told them that's reflected in this book is, don't bring shame on me. Don't bring shame on the name. And this is what this is saying in the Psalms here is, do not put shame because of me, because of my lack of hope, because of my lack of mercy, when I have the authority to be just. So the Psalms are providing that. And sustain me, my God, according to your promise, and I will live. Do not let my hopes be dashed. And I think that's the message for all of us. Do not let our hopes be dashed. There's reason for our hopes not to be dashed. And I think what the Psalms has done, I love this picture. It's the holy city, it's the pathway. Perhaps it's going through the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't think. I've been in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't remember it looking like that. But it's somewhere around. But it's a pathway that is there. And there are lots of paths in the world, and I've tried to show you images every week of a different path going somewhere. But none of the paths have an end on it. But I think that what this path was, what this image spoke to me about was, in my definitions of mercy, and what I'm going to do, what I should do in terms of trying to practice the mercy that's reflected in the Psalm. And there are little things that can be done. And I said, I can't do the big things. I don't have enough authority to do the big things, but I could sure do some of the little things. For example, when I drive my automobile and somebody is not acting as if I was the only person on the road, which sometimes I prefer that they do that, then what can I do to be merciful? I can take a deep breath and start thinking about what is it that this other person may be thinking about. Why is it that they're in a hurry? Maybe they are actually trying to get to something that is far more important than me. When I go to grocery shopping, and yes, I do some of the grocery shopping these days, and Susan said I needed to learn something about economics, and one of the ways to do it was to go to the grocery store. And so in doing that, when I shop, I can actually think about people who probably are going to be in front of me at the counter using food stamps rather than cash or credit card. That's beginning to form an idea of mercy in there. What can I do? I can do something about that. We all can do something about it. And that's the kind of mercy that we're asked to do. So the pathways are different for all of us. We all have different kind of shoes that we're going to wear on the path, and that's all right too. But I want to thank Ruthie for the opportunity to do this. I told you I had no idea where I was going, absolutely none. Was certainly not a scholar in the Psalms. and certainly don't leave as a scholar in the song. But what I have learned is the incredible messages that are there if you can read them honestly. And I think it provides us a lot to go on in there. So it's been a wonderful series. I am so happy that our ministers are going to be continuing it because there's a lot more for us to learn. But thank you for being so attentive and coming and giving me great encouragement for keep on looking because that path is going to lead to somewhere. And I think the end of it may be quite good. So we'll close with a word of prayer. Father, there's so many opportunities that you give us to be merciful, to use the authority that we're given, even the small bits of authority that we have, or perhaps the large bits of authority that we have, to be just and to be merciful, to be forgiving, to be tolerant, to be understanding, to be inclusive, as your Son taught us to be. As we leave here and go into our lives outside of this worship place, open our hearts and minds to how we can become more merciful in our activities of daily living. For we ask this in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you.
Steve, on behalf of the Joy class, give me that in one place. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Led us to the path, and down the path. And we appreciate it. So, Joy class.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'm yours forever. You are my strength, God of grace and power, and everything you hold in your hand. Still you make time for me. I can't understand. Praise you, God of earth and sky. How beautiful is your unfailing